The wedding reception was everything you'd expect from the Morrison family. Expensive, elegant, and meticulously orchestrated to showcase their success. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in ivory silk, while a string quartet played softly near the dance floor. My cousin Bradley's wedding to Amanda Worthington was the social event of the season, at least according to Aunt Margaret, who had spent the better part of 2 years planning it. I sat at table 12, relegated to the back corner with the distant relatives and family friends who hadn't made the inner circle. It was a familiar position, close enough to be included, far enough away to be forgotten. The seating chart, I suspected, had been Aunt Margaret's subtle way of acknowledging my existence while minimizing my visibility. From my vantage point, I could see the head table where Bradley held court, regaling his new in-laws with stories about his marketing consultancy business. At 28, he'd built what he liked to call a boutique agency that served local businesses with social media strategies and brand development. According to family lore, Morrison Marketing Solutions was thriving, bringing in six-figure contracts and establishing Bradley as the entrepreneurial success story of our generation. Poor Stephanie, I heard someone whisper at the table next to mine. It must be so difficult watching everyone else succeed. I glanced over to see Mrs. Patterson, one of my aunt's bridge club friends, speaking in hushed tones to her companion. They were looking in my direction with the expression people reserve for discussing tragic family circumstances. "What's her situation exactly?" asked the other woman. "Well, from what Margaret tells me, she's been struggling for years. Some kind of freelance work that doesn't pay very well. She's always behind on bills, living paycheck to paycheck." I took a sip of champagne and continued listening to Mrs. Patterson's analysis of my financial circumstances. It was fascinating, really, how confidently she spoke about matters she knew nothing about. Margaret mentioned that Stephanie had to borrow money from family just to afford a proper dress for tonight. That was news to me, considering I'd purchased my dress at Nordstrom 3 weeks ago and paid with my personal credit card. The same card I used for all my expenses, which were automatically paid in full each month from my investment accounts. "How embarrassing," the companion murmured. "At her age, you'd think she'd have figured things out by now." I was 32, apparently the age at which financial struggles become particularly shameful rather than merely unfortunate. The conversation was interrupted by Bradley's voice carrying across the reception hall as he stood to make an impromptu toast. The room quieted as he raised his champagne glass, commanding attention with the natural confidence that had always made him the golden child of our extended family. "I want to thank everyone for celebrating with Amanda and me tonight," Bradley began, his voice projecting clearly across the room. "Looking around at all of you, our family, our friends, our business associates, I'm reminded of how blessed we are to be surrounded by people who understand the value of hard work and success." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Bradley was known for his motivational speaking style, whether he was addressing potential clients or wedding guests. "You know, success isn't just about money," he continued, warming to his theme. "It's about building something meaningful, contributing to your community, setting an example for the next generation." His eyes swept the room as he spoke, and I noticed they lingered briefly on my table before moving on. "Some people understand this and some people—" He paused dramatically. "Well, some people are still figuring it out." More laughter, though it felt less comfortable this time. I recognized the subtle cruelty in Bradley's words, the way he could deliver criticism while maintaining plausible deniability about his target. "But that's okay," he continued with magnanimous generosity. "We all find our path eventually. Some of us just take longer than others." I felt the familiar heat in my cheeks that came with being publicly dismissed, even indirectly. Around me, wedding guests were nodding and smiling, accepting Bradley's narrative about success and failure, contribution and dependency. "To those who have supported Amanda and me in building our business, in creating our future together, thank you. And to those who are still working on building theirs." He raised his glass higher. "We believe in you. Keep trying." The toast concluded with enthusiastic applause and the clinking of glasses. Bradley beamed as wedding guests approached to congratulate him on both his marriage and his inspirational words. I remained seated, finishing my champagne while processing the public nature of what had just happened. Aunt Margaret appeared at my table a few minutes later, her expression a mixture of maternal concern and social embarrassment. "Stephanie, dear, how are you enjoying the reception? It's lovely, Aunt Margaret. You've done a beautiful job with everything. She sat down in the empty chair next to mine, smoothing her emerald green dress with practiced elegance. I hope you didn't take Bradley's toast personally. He's just so passionate about success and achievement. I didn't take it personally. Good, because you know we all love you. We just worry sometimes about your situation. I looked at my aunt, successful, well-meaning, completely convinced that she understood my circumstances better than I did. What situation is that? Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to pretend with me. Margaret told us about the financial difficulties, the bill payments, the struggle to find steady work. Margaret was Bradley's mother, my father's sister, and apparently the family's primary source of information about my personal finances. Margaret told you I can't pay my bills? She mentioned that you've been having some challenges. There's no shame in it, dear. The economy has been difficult for everyone. I nodded politely, wondering where Margaret had gotten her information about my supposed financial struggles. Probably from the same place Mrs. Patterson had learned about my borrowed dress and paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle. The important thing, Aunt Margaret continued, is that you don't give up. Bradley started his business with almost nothing, and look at him now. I looked across the room at Bradley, who was explaining something enthusiastically to a group of Amanda's relatives. According to family stories, Morrison Marketing Solutions had grown from a one-man operation to a thriving consultancy with multiple employees and high-profile clients. He's done very well, I agreed. He has. And Stephanie, if you ever need advice about building a business or finding your direction, I'm sure Bradley would be happy to help. He's always been generous with his knowledge. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and saw it was from David Kim, my partner at Meridian Capital Management. Stephanie, I know we're not supposed to work on weekends, but the Morrison Marketing acquisition just got final approval. Board meeting Monday to sign papers. I felt a familiar flutter of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. The Morrison Marketing acquisition had been in development for 3 months, ever since we'd identified Bradley's company as a strategic addition to our portfolio of digital marketing assets. Actually, Aunt Margaret, I should probably return this call. It's work-related. Of course, dear. Don't let me keep you from your freelance projects. I excused myself and stepped outside to the hotel's garden terrace, where I could speak privately. David answered on the first ring. Stephanie, sorry to bother you at your cousin's wedding, but I wanted to confirm the Morrison deal is finalized. All the paperwork cleared? Everything. We officially own Morrison Marketing Solutions as of 4 p.m. today. The acquisition price was exactly what we discussed, $2.4 million. I looked back through the windows at the reception, where Bradley was still entertaining guests with stories of his business success. And Bradley Morrison has no idea? None whatsoever. The acquisition was structured through our holding company, so his name will never appear on any of the documentation he'll see. As far as he knows, he's been acquired by Pinnacle Digital Holdings, which is our subsidiary, which is owned entirely by Meridian Capital Management, which is owned entirely by you. I smiled, watching Bradley gesture enthusiastically while describing what I presumed were his company's impressive growth metrics. David, when do we inform him about the change in ownership? Monday morning. I've scheduled a meeting with him and his management team to discuss the transition. Should I handle it personally, or would you prefer to be there? I considered the options. Bradley's reaction to learning his company had been acquired would probably be interesting, but his reaction to learning who had acquired it would be extraordinary. I'll handle the Monday meeting personally. Are you sure? This might be complicated given the family relationship. That's exactly why I should handle it personally. After hanging up, I remained on the terrace for several minutes, processing the irony of the situation. Inside, my cousin was celebrating his wedding and business success while accepting congratulations from family members who believed I couldn't pay my own bills. Outside, I was finalizing the acquisition of his company through my investment firm. When I returned to the reception, I found that the conversation at my table had turned to a detailed analysis of my career struggles. The problem with freelancers, Mrs. Patterson was explaining to her companion, is that they never have steady income. It's feast or famine, and mostly famine. And no benefits, added another woman I didn't recognize. No health insurance, no retirement planning. It's really no way to live past your 20s. I sat down quietly, listening to their expert assessment of freelance economics. Margaret mentioned that Stephanie does some kind of writing work, Mrs. Patterson continued. Articles, blog posts, that sort of thing. Very unpredictable income. This was fascinating. According to family lore, I was apparently a struggling freelance writer, which explained their certainty about my financial instability. Writers, everyone knew, were chronically underpaid and professionally unreliable. At least she's trying, the unnamed woman said charitably. Some people just aren't cut out for traditional business success. True. Not everyone can be like Bradley. I glanced toward the head table, where Bradley was deep in conversation with Amanda's father about expansion plans for Morrison Marketing Solutions. According to my due diligence research, the company had been profitable but cash poor, struggling with client retention and facing increased competition from larger agencies. The acquisition had been as much a rescue operation as a strategic investment. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Uncle Robert Morrison, Bradley's father and the owner of Morrison Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company that had been in the family for 2 generations. I stepped outside again to answer the call. Uncle Robert, congratulations on Bradley's wedding. Everything looks beautiful. Stephanie, thank you. Listen, I'm calling about something urgent. I just got off the phone with someone from Meridian Capital Management. My pulse quickened slightly. Oh, they're telling me they want to acquire Morrison Industries. Something about expanding their portfolio of family-owned manufacturing businesses. I felt the familiar thrill of a complex deal coming together. Morrison Industries had been on our acquisition target list for 6 months, but we'd been waiting for the right moment to approach. What did they offer? $15 million for the whole operation. Buildings, equipment, client contracts, everything. That sounds like a significant offer. It is. It's actually more than I expected to get, especially in this market. But Stephanie, here's the strange part. They want to close within 30 days. They're offering all cash, no financing contingencies. That does sound unusual. The representative I spoke with, a David Kim, he said they'd been researching our company for months and were ready to move quickly on the right opportunity. I closed my eyes, processing the implications. David had clearly decided to accelerate our timeline for the Morrison Industries acquisition, probably because he knew it would create interesting family dynamics given the wedding timing. Are you considering the offer? I have to consider it. $15 million would set up my retirement very comfortably, and Bradley would get his inheritance early instead of waiting for me to pass away. That sounds like a win-win situation. There's just one thing that bothers me. What's that? This Meridian Capital Management. I've never heard of them. When I asked Kim about the company, he said they prefer to maintain a low profile. Very private, very discreet. Some investment firms operate that way. I suppose. He did mention that the company is owned by someone with family ties to this area, someone who understands local business culture. I felt my stomach drop slightly. Did he say who? No, but he hinted that I might be surprised by how connected the owner is to our community. After hanging up, I stood on the terrace trying to decide how I felt about David's apparent decision to pursue both Morrison companies simultaneously. The Bradley acquisition had been strategic. His marketing agency fit perfectly into our digital services portfolio. But acquiring Uncle Robert's manufacturing company would make this a very different kind of family situation. When I returned to the reception, I found Bradley at my table, apparently having decided to grace the distant relatives with his presence. Stephanie, he said with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been drinking champagne for several hours. I was just telling everyone about the exciting developments at Morrison Marketing. What kind of developments? Well, I can't share all the details yet, but let's just say we're about to become part of something much bigger. A major investment group wants to acquire the company. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward with interest. How exciting. That must be very validating for your hard work. It absolutely is. And the best part? The acquisition price is going to set Amanda and me up very comfortably. We're talking about buying a house, maybe starting a family sooner than we planned. I sipped my champagne and listened to Bradley describe his good fortune. The investment group, Pinnacle Digital Holdings, they specialize in growing small marketing agencies into regional powerhouses. They have the capital, the connections, the expertise to take Morrison Marketing to the next level. Will you stay involved with the company? Asked the unnamed woman. Oh, absolutely. I'll be the president of the new operation with full authority over day-to-day operations. The investors just want to provide capital and strategic guidance. Bradley was clearly pleased with his version of the acquisition terms. I made a mental note to have David clarify the actual management structure during Monday's meeting. And Bradley, Mrs. Patterson said with a meaningful glance in my direction, this must be especially satisfying given how hard it can be to build a successful business. It really is. You know, success isn't accidental. It comes from vision, persistence, taking calculated risks. He looked directly at me as he spoke. Some people understand that and others, well, others are still learning. I felt the familiar sting of his casual cruelty, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what Monday morning would bring. Actually, Bradley, I'm curious about something. What's that? Have you met the actual owners of Pinnacle Digital Holdings? The people behind the investment group? Not yet, but I'm meeting with their representatives on Monday. Why? I was just wondering if you knew anything about their background, their other investments. Bradley waved dismissively. Stephanie, these are serious business people. They don't waste time on social meetings or personal relationships. It's all about numbers, performance, results. I'm sure you're right. I mean, this isn't like your freelance writing work where personal connections matter more than professional competence. This is high-level corporate strategy. The table fell silent at the comparison. Mrs. Patterson looked embarrassed by Bradley's bluntness, while the other guests studied their champagne glasses with sudden interest. Of course, I said evenly. I'm sure the meeting on Monday will be very enlightening. It will be. And Stephanie, if you ever want advice about transitioning from freelance work to a more stable career, I'd be happy to help. After this acquisition, I'll have even more insights into how serious business actually works. Uncle Robert appeared at our table before I could respond, his expression troubled. Bradley, can I speak with you privately? Bradley stood up with slight unsteadiness, clearly having celebrated more enthusiastically than he'd intended. Of course, Dad. What's going on? They stepped away from the table, but their voices carried clearly in the acoustics of the reception hall. Son, I just got an offer to sell Morrison Industries. Bradley's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Someone wants to buy the family business? 15 million, all cash, 30-day closing. 15 million? Bradley's voice was loud enough that several nearby tables stopped their conversations. Dad, that's incredible. It is a substantial offer. Who's the buyer? An investment group called Meridian Capital Management. Very private, very discreet. They specialize in acquiring family businesses. Bradley set his champagne glass down hard on the nearest table. Dad, this is amazing. Between my acquisition and yours, our family is about to become very wealthy. Both acquisitions? Morrison Marketing is being acquired too, by Pinnacle Digital Holdings. It's happening the same week. Uncle Robert's expression changed from troubled to confused. Bradley, that seems like quite a coincidence. It's not coincidence, Dad. It's market forces. Successful businesses attract investment capital. I watched this conversation from my seat at table 12, wondering if either of them would make the connection before Monday morning. Bradley, did you research this Pinnacle Digital Holdings company? Of course I researched them. They're a subsidiary of. Bradley paused, clearly trying to remember details he hadn't considered important. A subsidiary of what? I'm not sure. But my contact said they're part of a larger investment firm with extensive experience in digital marketing. Uncle Robert pulled out his phone and started typing. Bradley, what if these two acquisitions are connected somehow? Connected how? What if the same investment group is buying both companies? Bradley laughed, but it sounded forced. Dad, that's impossible. These are completely different industries, completely different investment strategies. Are they? Uncle Robert was staring at his phone screen with an expression of dawning realization. Bradley, I'm looking at the corporate filings for Pinnacle Digital Holdings. And it's owned by Meridian Capital Management. Bradley's remaining champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, sending crystal shards and champagne across the reception area. The sound caused everyone in the immediate vicinity to stop their conversations and turn toward the commotion. That can't be right. Bradley said weakly. It's right here in the public filings. Pinnacle Digital Holdings is a wholly owned subsidiary of Meridian Capital Management. But that means the same company is buying both Morrison Marketing and Morrison Industries. I stood up from my table and walked over to where Uncle Robert and Bradley were standing, surrounded by concerned wedding guests who were trying to help clean up the broken glass. Uncle Robert, Bradley, is everything okay? Bradley stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between confusion and dawning horror. Stephanie, Uncle Robert said slowly, you don't happen to know anything about Meridian Capital Management, do you? I looked at Bradley, then at the small crowd of family members and wedding guests who were listening to this conversation with growing interest. Actually, I do know something about them. What do you know? Bradley asked, his voice barely audible. I know they're a private investment firm that specializes in acquiring undervalued companies with growth potential. Stephanie, Uncle Robert pressed, how do you know that? I looked around at the faces surrounding us, at Mrs. Patterson, who had been so certain about my financial struggles, at Aunt Margaret, who had worried about my inability to pay bills, at Bradley, who had spent the evening lecturing wedding guests about success and failure. I know because I own Meridian Capital Management. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the string quartet playing in the distant corner of the reception hall. You own what? Bradley whispered. Meridian Capital Management. It's my investment firm. Which means I'm acquiring both Morrison Marketing Solutions and Morrison Industries. Uncle Robert sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Stephanie, are you telling us you're buying both family businesses? As of 4 p.m. today, I already own Morrison Marketing. The Morrison Industries acquisition will be finalized pending your acceptance of our offer. Bradley was staring at me like I was speaking in a foreign language. Stephanie, that's impossible. You can't even pay your own bills. Who told you I couldn't pay my bills? Everyone knows. My mom said. Aunt Margaret mentioned. I looked at the crowd of family members who had spent the evening discussing my financial struggles and career failures. What exactly does everyone know about my financial situation? Mrs. Patterson spoke up hesitantly. Well, dear, we know you do freelance writing work, and that's always been unpredictable income. I don't do freelance writing work. You don't. I run an investment firm that manages approximately $340 million in assets. The number hit the reception like a physical force. Someone gasped audibly. 340 million? Aunt Margaret asked weakly. As of last quarter's valuation, yes. Bradley was shaking his head slowly. Stephanie, this is insane. If you had $300 million, why would you sit at table 12? Why would you dress so modestly? Why would you let everyone think you were struggling? I looked around at their shocked faces, at the family members who had spent years treating me with a mixture of pity and condescension, who had assumed that quiet meant unsuccessful, that modest meant poor. Because it was easier than explaining myself to people who had already decided what my life looked like. But we're your family, Uncle Robert protested. You're my family, and you've spent tonight discussing my inability to pay bills and my need to find a real career. We didn't know. You didn't ask. You assumed. Bradley was still processing the magnitude of the reversal. Stephanie, if you own my company now, what does that mean for my position? I looked at my cousin, successful, confident Bradley, who had spent the evening lecturing wedding guests about achievement and contribution. It means we'll discuss your role in the company during our meeting on Monday morning. Our meeting? At 9 a.m. My office downtown. We'll be reviewing the transition plan and discussing management structure. Management structure? Bradley, you'll still have a position with the company, but you'll be reporting to the new management team I'm installing. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. Bradley, who had spent the evening celebrating his business success and his family's bright future, was now facing the fact that his acquisition was actually more like a takeover, and the person taking over was the cousin he'd been publicly dismissing for years. Stephanie, he said quietly, I think I owe you an apology. You owe me several apologies. I'm sorry. We all are. We had no idea. You had no idea because you were too busy talking to listen. Too busy assuming to ask questions. Uncle Robert stood up slowly. Stephanie, what happens now? I looked around at the wedding reception, at the crystal and silk, at the evidence of success and celebration, at the family members who were only now beginning to understand that the person they'd relegated to table 12 was actually the most successful person in the room. Now we finish celebrating Bradley's wedding. Monday we start discussing the future of both companies. And our family relationships? Aunt Margaret asked tentatively. That depends on whether you're ready to see me as I actually am instead of who you assumed I was. The conversation continued for another hour, with family members taking turns asking questions about my business, expressing shock at the acquisition news, and generally trying to reconcile their assumptions about my life with the reality of what I'd built. But the moment I'll remember most was when Uncle Robert pulled me aside as the reception was ending. "Stephanie, I need to ask you something." "What's that?" "When you acquire Morrison Industries, what are your plans for the company?" I thought about his question, about the manufacturing business he'd built over decades, about the employees who depended on it for their livelihoods. "I plan to modernize the operations, expand into new markets, and double the workforce within 5 years." "You're not going to shut it down or sell off the assets?" "Uncle Robert, I don't buy companies to destroy them. I buy them to grow them." He nodded slowly, relief evident on his face. "Stephanie, there's something I need to tell you." "What's that?" "I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now." As I drove home from the reception, I reflected on the evening's revelations. Tomorrow, the family would wake up with a completely different understanding of their quiet, modest relative who couldn't pay her bills. Monday morning, Bradley would walk into his first meeting as an employee of a company I owned. But the most satisfying part wasn't the shock or the reversal of expectations. It was finally being seen for who I'd become instead of who they'd assumed I was. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned. It's just perfect timing and the courage to stop hiding your success from people who were too busy judging to notice you'd succeeded.